Hi, I'm George Nordhaus, and welcome to Monday Morning. Today we are going to be talking about selling and service and time. Oh my, oh my, that sounds familiar. Where have I heard that before? Well, we'll see. 7 simple words to improve sales outcomes. I had heard of Sheldon Snodgrass. He's in the Northeast and does a lot of training and teaching up there, steady sales. And then I went into it in depth, and various people told me about it and said, hey, you don't have Sheldon on your program. I said, well, great. And we subsequently now have communicated and will produce a lot more because he's a heck of a presenter. Let me tell you about Sheldon just a minute. I'll show you his picture. In fact, you know what I think I'll do? Let me get that. There you go. 7 simple words. Yes, CSRs, upsell, cross-sell, blah, 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 blah. You tell us better about yourself than I can.
All right, George. I like how you said upsell, cross-sell, blah, 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 as if we've heard those terms so often
Yeah, right.
that they're tired phrases.
Amen.
But again, they perhaps are tired phrases, but we need constant reminding of them, just like we do when we go to church on Sundays or temple on Fridays to learn about forgiveness and compassion and patience and love, these things that we might say, yeah, blah, blah, blah to, but yet we constantly have to practice.
Good point.
And rather than tell you about my bio and my professional background, which you can find at steadysales.com, meet Sheldon, and there you get all the standard professional credentials. I'd like to begin with a confession, harken back to my Catholic school days, and I want to confess, so that way I preempt any audience member who might be thinking, well, gee, Sheldon, you've never worked in an insurance agency, so you don't know what it's like for us. And I would tell them, you're absolutely right. I never worked in an insurance agency, and that's not what I study. What I study is sales and marketing. I study organizational behavior. I study human dynamics and psychology, but I apply it exclusively in the realm of the independent agency. Okay, so my confession is I've never sat in your desk, but I've sat next to your desk at countless agencies. I'm talking small shops, 1- and 2-person CSR, mom and pops, all the way to 62-seat call centers for large carriers. And I've been doing that for about, well, Steady Sales started about 13 years ago, the last 10 of which have been exclusively in the insurance agency, almost exclusively in the independent agency world. So there it is. If you want to know more about the bio, you can find the official version on steadysales.com. But that's the confession.
I got a confession
and,
too.
Well,
Let me make a confession.
Give me a confession.
I grew up in a Catholic training too, the same thing. And my confession is that I've been in business longer than you, much longer than you, and I've never been an agent. I've never had to do that in their chairs. So I understand exactly what you're talking about. I've learned, but I haven't learned as much about CSRs as you have, obviously, but it does, eventually you learn, and it's a better way, I think, to learn than, well, having to do it. Anyway, go forward. I love it.
Well, that might be the justification that you and I make to ourselves,
yeah, right.
But I also think there's great validity to that. And while I'm on the subject of being unorthodox, or in the process of being unorthodox with my confessions, let me also begin what might be seen as a standard corporate training video with something also unorthodox, which is a poem. Why? Well, for 2 reasons. One, it's quite beautiful. And when's the last time any of us on this call have actually read or soaked in a poem? So I'm going to give you the chance to do that. It's only 10 lines long, so
Okay.
bear with me.
Go ahead.
And those of you who might be impatient with poetry, just know that I'm going to tie it very directly to the lesson at hand.
And you should know
something.
So
here we go. It's a poem.
Wait a minute. You should know something. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and we have like 170 of these. This is the first time anybody's read a poem in the whole time. Go for it.
All right. Well, already a first, and let's hope that the content is equally a first in terms of its applicability and power. So here's a poem by a woman named Maya Stein, whose 10-line Tuesday I subscribe to. Every Tuesday I get a beautiful 10-line poem from her, and this is one that she writes called "The Quiet Hum of Industry." Here we go. You wouldn't have noticed she was making a bookshelf out of paper, or that he was figuring the math for a skateboard ramp, or how the backyard was plotting next summer's harvest. It would have been impossible to recognize the musician turning an ear toward a field of rustling corn, or a painter puzzling over the weave of a blank canvas, or that writer in a hotel room in North Carolina, her fingers on a warm keyboard, remembering the steps all over again. But this is where the work gets done, this quiet hum of industry, away from the world's fluorescent attention, with a beauty untheatric as a sea lion tottering off the docks at Pier 39 and into the salted, murky waters of the Pacific. Beautiful. It's a beautiful poem, and I love this this element of, well, this line where she says, "But this is where the work gets done, this quiet hum of industry away from the world's fluorescent attention." And I bring that up because this idea of improving sales outcomes, or improving anyone's outcomes, regardless of what they are, and by that I mean improving relationships, improving your personal health, losing 5 pounds, learning how to play a musical instrument. Those are all very private journeys, but we take them in a very public space. Now, in the agency world, you've got the hum of the agency going around. You've got employees coming and going. You've got maybe potential walk-ins. You're in an office complex, and it's a very public environment. But the journey to improve outcomes, again, regardless of what they are, and today we're talking about sales outcomes, is very private. Why? Because ultimately, any outcome is driven by one's behavior, one's actions in the moment, and that's always very private. So when we think about outcomes, improving outcomes, I know it can be overwhelming. And if you think about just the industry, the agency personnel, so much to learn and do. I'm reminded of that line from The Wizard of Oz, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Right? There's so many things that I have to learn and know and do and study and be good at. And before we get into sales, just take a look at this. Here's 4 huge categories. Right? Workflows. What are the inner office workflows? How do you manage your desk? How do you manage process, inbound quote, quotes in process, follow-up, suspenses, and the like? Then you have operational policy and procedures and protocols. Then you have the technology. For goodness sake, many carriers have different point of sale systems that you have to enter. You've got your agency management systems that you have to learn how to navigate and be facile with. And then there's the industry knowledge that one has to have, not only to maintain their license, but think about the carriers that each bring different products and levels of product with all these variations in coverages and endorsements and so forth. And many agencies are representing multiple, in fact, all agencies are representing multiple carriers, otherwise they'd be captives, right? So I'm thinking, wow. If I were a CSR, it would be very easy to get overwhelmed, that is, lions, tigers, and bears, sales and service and time, oh my, in this world of improving outcomes. But look, I'm a sales guy, and like Abraham Maslow said, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when I think about improving outcomes, I think about, all right, sales. Let's figure out how we can improve sales in my day-to-day service life. And even improving sales, like an onion, has multiple layers, right? It's not just about asking more. It's not just about increasing your cross-sell or your close rate. It's about all sorts of things. Forgive me, my screen just went away. So here I just, off the top of my head, have a list of 11 things that I thought of as I was putting this program together. And I put this here because we have varying degrees of expertise on the phone, right? Someone listening to this may have 20 years or more experience. Someone else might have 20 days. They're new into the business. And irrespective of experience, there's different comfort levels and levels of competence that people bring to their various domains. And in this case, just take a look at this list. How about item 1, which to me is a biggie? That's consistently and comfortably switching from a service task, that is the inbound call, to a sales ask. For a lot of folks, they don't even do that. They're going 100 miles an hour. They don't think about it. Maybe they don't want to appear salesy. Maybe they think it's not their job, all sorts of things. Then there's this idea of trial closing. So many of the folks I work with, there's a tremendous amount of quotes that are in process that never bind. What about dealing with standard objections? So much now in the world, particularly of personal lines, this insurance is getting commoditized, and it's all being price driven. And very often those are the standard objections that we have to deal with. And how do you switch the discussion to be one of protection and value, picking up the phone and making outbound calls, closing new business inquiries with greater frequency, asking for referrals, reducing remarketing, on and on and on it goes, right? Lots of ways to improve outcomes. So before we start chipping away at this list, indeed, I'm going to just hit on item 1 for today in the interest of time. I want to present a slide that I think is among the most powerful in the deck today. In fact, it's among the most powerful slides I use in any of my presentations. And it should be very apparent what you're looking at right here on the screen. And I put this here because I was inspired by the work of an author named Charles Duhigg, who wrote a book called The Power of Habit. In fact, I have it on my shelf here. Let me grab it. It's The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do and How to Change. And make no mistake, our lives are driven by our habit patterns, right? The way we get up and brush our teeth and get out of bed and make our coffee and answer the phone, on and on it goes. So in the agency realm, so too are we driven by our habits. And when it comes to sales habits, again, before I even get into sales habits, one can safely draw a circle around a particular habit, right? And that becomes your comfort zone. That's your default nature. And growth, no matter what the growth, by definition, requires you to go outside that circle. Now, sometimes it may be a millimeter, George, and other times it may be miles, right? And just think about it. Growth, it doesn't matter what it is. If you want to lose 5 pounds or 25 pounds or run a 10K or start to change your eating habits or learn a musical instrument or a foreign language, every one of those is an aspect of growth or an example of growth. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I love it.
Right, and every one of those, therefore, requires you to stretch in some way. But by nature, we're designed not to. We live in that comfort zone. Do we not? I mean, who wants to be uncomfortable? Nobody. And when we face the prospect of discomfort, we have to, well, there's a couple of things that we have to do. Typically, we tend to recoil and we stay in that zone. But if that growth goal is important to us, that is, you want to lose those 5 pounds or learn how to play the guitar or the piano or speak Spanish, it's important enough to you, you will go outside of that comfort zone. And so before I get into the 7 simple words to improve sales outcomes, I want to present what I think are 4 critical components that one must occupy to be in this, what I call the sweet spot of growth. 4 things, no matter what the growth is, right? I'm going to keep reminding you that this doesn't have to do exclusively with improving sales outcome. Buy-in, focus, practice, measure. Buy-in, that means I want to do it. It means it's important to me. I have a stake in this. It's valuable. And I don't mean I'm going to do this because I get paid $10 of commission on this umbrella that I sell. I mean, that may be sufficient. But maybe even something as far as saying, yes, I embrace sales as part of my service job. I talk to a lot of CSRs who feel like, in fact, they say, my job isn't sales, my job is service, or that's the producer's job. So I would say, okay, there's a lack of buy-in there in terms of the embrace of a sales mandate, right? And without belaboring that point, in the interest of time, I just want to isolate the other 3. Focus. Remember that list a moment ago with the lions and tigers and bears that are sales and service? Oh my, there was a dozen odd items on that list, right?
That list was the most shocking thing to me because I knew that instinctively. Each of those things on there people have to do, but when you see it all put together that way, all of a sudden, what are we demanding of these people? Man, how can they know all these things? So I'm beginning to, I'm relating. For sure.
Right. Well, I'm glad you're relating. So I can just go back to it very quickly. Here it is. Look at all that. So can one possibly be expected to get good at all of those things all at once? The answer, of course, is no. So therefore, I say it's important to bring an element of focus. If you want to improve sales outcomes, again, or any outcome, then it's important to isolate what is that area that you're most bought into where you can apply focus. And only when you apply that focus can you do item 3, which, of course, is practice. You have to repeat this thing. Why? Because of that slide right before, which says, I am in my comfort zone. If I'm going to grow outside that, I have to do it again and again and again until that circle expands.
Right.
Because our human tendency is to withdraw or avoid those things that make us uncomfortable. So it's that element of practice that allows you to develop increasing levels of comfort. And then finally, everybody's least favorite element, measure. Right? And I want to talk a little bit about measurement momentarily because I think a lot of folks make a mistake when they measure. And by that I mean two things. One, they measure the wrong things. That is, they're focused exclusively on outcome as opposed to the things that drive outcome. And secondly, we tend to equate, let me just jump to that slide, we tend to equate measurement of our outcomes with our worth and our value as human beings. And I'm going to say more about that in a minute. So let me just say those are the challenges of measurement. So here are the big four in terms of the sales lessons that I tend to teach. Now, I realize I may be confusing you a bit because I just mentioned four elements of the sweet spot, right? So let me just ask you to take a look at the slide and understand that what I'm talking about is four things that we need to pay attention to or attend to on a consistent basis if we are going to grow. And you can pick whatever growth you want, whether it's, again, a personal goal or a business goal, and you will see how you need these four elements. This measurement is an element of accountability, right? It's a measurement of gauging. It's stepping on the scale. It's looking at the stopwatch. It's counting closed business. All right, so those are what I mean by four. And here, I just want to introduce four lessons that I introduced, one of which I'm going to talk about in depth today, okay? So the big four sales lessons that I often start with are, number one, helping people to understand and really connect to the idea that sales and service are two sides of the same coin. There's not a big chasm that exists between the two. They're not two different worlds. Indeed, George, I believe that when you come from a place of integrity and you're motivated by a desire to serve, then the height of that service is good selling. You're not selling snake oil or elixir or trying to add policies on an existing account for its own sake. You're trying to do it. You lead with integrity. You lead with a desire to help people, and money follows, right? The outcome follows from leading with a place, from leading from the heart, is how I like to say. So I could spend another 20 minutes talking about that. It's easier said than done, but just know there's a lot of work to be done, kind of just psychologically embracing this idea that sales and service are very close cousins, not distant relatives.
Good. I like that thought. Yeah.
And so the next one, I write, be brave enough to start conversations that matter. Here's where we're going to go deep today. It's about one simple ask, bridging the sales, the service task in the moment, the certificate of insurance, the claim question, the billing question, the coverage question, that standard inbound call, the vehicle change, whatever it is that occupies a CSRs, you might call them account managers, they're known by different titles, but the people in the service trenches, taking those daily tasks and making a sales ask. That's what we're going to talk about. And then when it happens, of course, sometimes people have a default reaction, that is, customers have a default reaction, we'll call it an objection. They say, no, I'm not interested. No, I already spend too much. No, I've got enough insurance. No, my cousin owns an agency. No, I've got my auto with this other place, right? So how do you deal with those? And then finally, this idea, I write this graphic here, how much, because very often we have opportunities to trial close before we trial quote. Because quoting, let's admit, takes a fair amount of time. Sometimes, I mean, if it's a complex policy, sometimes you can price and bind things in the moment. But I don't want to get too distracted here. I just want to present on this idea of trial closing, but just know that it's, I believe, an important element of improving sales outcome. But it pales next to this one, the one simple ask. All right, so we're going to talk about that. And before we do, I just want to say, if we're going to improve that, if you're going to improve how much we're asking as a team, at a small agency or large, we got to get clear on what we're going to measure. And a moment ago, I alluded to this paradox that if you want to improve outcomes, you can't focus your measurement on outcomes. Right? Do you hear the paradox in that? If you want to improve outcomes, actually focusing on them impedes your ability to improve them. Why? Because you miss the small steps that drive outcomes. So let me get very practical here for a moment. Let's suppose, George, that you've got an agency and your team is saying, hey, we ask all the time. George has been bugging us about cross-selling and upselling and account rounding since we've been working here, and we always do it. So immediately my red flags go up when I hear people say always and all the time and consistently. Because I like to debunk a myth, which is every service touch is a sales opportunity. That's just simply not true. And I agree that every service touch is a chance to give great service and perhaps plant the seeds of a future sale, generate positive word of mouth or goodwill, but not every service touch is a chance to add another line or generate a quote or make a specific sales ask. And all you have to do is think about the fact that sometimes people call and they're in a crisis, or they're in a claim, or they're out of work and they're trying to reduce their premium, or they're downright rude or nasty. And I'm like, okay, let's just agree that not every one of those, your service touches, is a sales opportunity. Would you agree with that, George?
I guess so. I've always thought, I
it,
always heard the opposite, though. I've always heard it is a sales opportunity, but I understand what you're saying, and you're probably right.
Well, I get in lots of arguments with this, but I stay in the ring until you are beat down and completely agree with me. So think about it. What I meant when I said a sales opportunity, I mean, I'm talking to you, George. You call me to switch your Honda to Toyota, and you're at the dealership and you're in a rush right now and you need something. Then is not the time to talk about umbrella. Or let's suppose you call me and you had an accident and I see that you're missing your home with me and you're not around it. Then is not the time to make the sales ask.
Okay.
So it's a chance to plant a seed.
Got
it's
it.
a chance to deliver great service. So that's what I mean when every service touch isn't a sales opportunity.
Okay.
Got it?
Got it.
Okay, so let's just let me go through this idea of again, we're talking about improving outcomes, and the specific outcome is the frequency of making a sales ask. Okay, so I'm going to put this slide up right. Well, here's the slide. Bridging from the service task to the sales ask. That's the sales outcome, right? Not trial closing, not handling objections, not any of the other things that I mentioned in my prior list, right? Making outbound calls or any of those things. So this is actually a slide here that would be appropriate for management or a supervisor or a team leader who's interested in helping CSRs advance their outcomes. All right, so I've already set up the idea that our focus here on the word goal isn't the place to focus when we want to improve. So where is? Where is? Well, what I do with the agencies I work with is I say, let's get real about the number of people we're actually talking to. And so I just want you to count for a week how many daily service touches you have. And when I do this and I ask people to estimate, it's always significantly more than the reality. Because what we do is we tend to conflate things like dealer calls or underwriters or mortgage originators or marketing reps, right? And we add all those to our call volume. And when I say, how many customers did you actually talk to? Are you with me, George?
I'm with you all the way. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first thing. Just get a baseline metric on how many folks you talk to. And just for the sake of math, let's say it's 10 a day. That's times 5 days a week, that's 50 a week. And we just agreed that not all of those are sales opportunities. Some percentage you're not going to be able to sell to. And so then I say, all right, how many asks do you hear yourself make? Out of 50 customer touches in a week, again, hypothetically, how many asks? I don't care what it was or what they said. I just want you to pay attention to, do you hear yourself making an ask? And I've done this, as I said, with hundreds of agencies across the country. And do you want to take a guess, George, at what the average percentage is of asks relative to touches? Again, the number of touches don't matter because it's a percentage. What would you guess?
I don't know, 35% maybe, something like that.
It's 10. You would think it's actually 10%.
Oh my gosh.
It's 10%. When CSRs are doing an honest self-assessment and tracking unique customer touches, and then when they hear themselves making an ask, and I don't fault them for this because there's all sorts of reasons that we can get into in another call, not least of which is sales reluctance or a sense of busyness or overwhelm. It can go on and on. And then I say, look, after you just track your touches and your asks, track one more thing, what people say. It's either going to be a yes or a no or a maybe. Not does it bind, because we know that people will say, yes, send me that quote, and then they ignore it. It goes into what I call follow-up purgatory, right?
Yep.
It goes into follow-up purgatory. Okay, so I realized I went a little deep on this idea of measurement, and I just want to back up and give you context. Remember I talk about these 4 overlapping circles: buy-in, focus, practice, measure,
Good.
right? So if we're going to focus on, as I said, the task to the ask, we have to practice what we're going to say, and we have to count how well we do it, right? So that's why I had this slide up here.
Okay.
Now, let's just talk about that because it seems easy. Hey, Sheldon, it's no problem. When a customer calls and you see that they're missing a tenants policy, just ask them, hey, I see that you don't have a tenants policy, and how would you fill in the blank? And that's what I want to talk about for the rest of this presentation. How do you fill in the blank? So here we are, the service task. Again, vehicle change, coverage question, billing question, whatever it is. Now, before I get into what I would recommend, I want to share with you an actual script from a commercial line CSR at an agency that I was working with earlier this year. I asked them, and in fact, I was listening to recordings, and then I asked people to share their script, and this is not only what I heard, but what was written to me. So what do you think of this actual script?
Well, I think it's pretty good. I mean, it seems to me it's good.
You think it's you think it's pretty good because, first of all, they get a gold star for asking. But what do you imagine a customer who, let's say a small commercial account that doesn't have cyber liability, might think about the words cyber liability? Just stop. I notice there's no cyber liability policy.
Too much.
What do you think the average customer is going to say?
He or she won't know. They really don't know. Understand.
Exactly.
Yeah,
they don't have any idea what that means. And then the second phrase here, may I offer you a quote for this valuable coverage? Well, if I'm a customer and I don't know what it is, already you've got 2 strikes. 1, I don't know what it is. 2, you're asking me to buy more insurance.
Yep, got it.
You're asking me to buy more insurance. And I think that there's a far better way to ask. And here we are now at these 7 simple words. Okay, so before I reveal the next slide, I want you to know that no matter, you could put 100 variations on this script. Hey, I noticed there's no cyber. I noticed you don't have umbrella. I see that you don't have your home with us, but we do have your auto, right? Whatever it is, the second phrase, in my experience, George, most CSRs will make a sales offer. They will say, hey, did you know you could get this discount? Or, hey, did you know that you would get this coverage? Would you like a quote? Or could I quote this for you? Or could I offer you this, right? And I think that that's a mistake in this world of sales phobia. There's another book that I talk about in my workshops called To Sell is Human by an author named Daniel Pink, who did a massive survey, the results of which show middle America is essentially associates sales and sales asks with being pushy, with negativity, with schmarminess, with sleaziness, with all sorts of negative associations with sales. That's what people have, okay? So when you finish your what you noticed with an offer, you're triggering a knee-jerk response. That is people's internal resistance to being sold. And although we might want to move to that, I think that there's a better way to do it. And it's 7 words long, and here they are. Technically, it's not 7 words because you have to fill in the blank after this ellipsis, right? So I want to just pause for a moment on this. And to those of you who are thinking, that's awkward, I would never say, may I ask why, just know that I don't mean for you to script this literally. You could say, I'm just curious, how come? Do you mind if I ask? I'm seeing a couple things, and I wonder if you don't mind telling me how come, right? Something that doesn't make a sales offer. So let's stick with this hypothetical example, George, of you calling in to switch your vehicle. It's a standard, frequent occurrence in agencies where you got a new car and you want to add it to the policy and drop your old one.
Got it.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the CSR. I'm going about my business, asking for your VIN number, year, make, model, talking about coverages on the vehicle, making sure that your limits are on good shape. And I noticed, George, that you don't have your homeowner's insurance with us.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I notice you live in an apartment that you don't have a renter's or a tenant's policy with us,
okay.
Right? Let's just suppose that that's what I notice. Let's first of all agree that if you're coming from a place of true service, that, well, let me ask you, do you think I owe it to you to ask for that other piece?
Absolutely. That's your responsibility as an independent agent, of course.
It's your responsibility, not because it's going to make money for the agency, but because you know that your customer is missing out on some potential value, not least of which is, the package policy discount. But I don't want to just limit this to discounts, because very often you're going to ask for something and you won't get a discount. So the first 3 words, I noticed that, I think is a magical way to pivot the conversation from why the customer called to what you want to say. Right? So I finished the vehicle change, and before you say to me, all right, Sheldon, goodbye, I say, hey, George, listen, well, I've got your account up, and now that car's taken care of, there's something that jumped out on me on your account. Or I'm noticing a couple things, or I see that. Again, whatever language you're comfortable with. Now, many CSRs do this instinctively, but then they bridge to a direct ask right away. And instead, I'm suggesting, why not say, hey, George, I'm curious, excuse me,
Yeah, why?
George, now that the car's all, I see that we don't have your homeowner's policy with us. I'm just curious, do you mind if I ask how come?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I don't have an answer.
Well, let's just talk about what would be the answers.
Well,
now, when I do this in a workshop.
Yeah, it may be somebody
Go
that
ahead.
I got it down the street, and my brother's in the insurance business, but I couldn't. There's 1,000 answers for that.
Okay, there's actually 2. So here I have 2 graphics. Let's direct our attention to Albert Einstein, right? So here you have a standard bell curve, right? And bell curves, all those show us is that the majority of instances, the majority of occurrences are always in the middle of the curve, right? We always have outlier positions, and in this example, it's IQ, right? So on the left, there might be someone who is mentally handicapped, and over here you have geniuses. So think about the question. I'm curious, George, I see you don't have this coverage. To use the cyber, I would say, hey, George, I see that you don't have something called cyber liability protection. I'm curious if you know what that is and why you don't have that in place. Now, you went right away to, let me go to this objection, my cousin owns an agency down the street, or I have it down the street. What is another potential answer to, may I ask why?
Nobody ever asked me.
Boom! Is it possible that people might say, nobody ever asked me? I don't know. What is it? Oops, sorry. What does it do? Why would you ask? How would it help? If I ask you a question, I'm curious, why don't you have this? Isn't it possible, indeed likely, that many of the responses we get will be ones like that, where the customer just says, I don't know. I don't have it in my place. Now, I'm no Pollyanna, so I agree that sometimes people will say, I already pay too much, I don't want more insurance, my cousin owns an agency. Yeah. But those are objections, and I would say let's just handle those in a separate area of focus and deal with what's going to happen 70% of the time. 70% of the time your customer is going to be saying, I don't know, what is it? Why do you ask? Tell me what it does. How much might it cost? Therein lies the value of starting a conversation that doesn't trigger a negative sales reaction. Good that point. Is, oh God, here's Sheldon asking me to spend more money on insurance. All I'm asking you, George, is how come you've chosen not to have a particular type of coverage? And this would work with endorsements, it would work with umbrellas, it works in commercial lines, it works in personal lines. It's a simple way to start a conversation where the customer, 70% of the time, is going to ask you to do what you do so well, which is explain.
Right.
You with me?
Yeah, absolutely. With you. Totally.
Okay. So let me just switch gears a little bit and point to the second graphic on the screen. Right. So a moment ago, I referenced Charles Duhigg, the author of The Habit Loop. Right, when I talked about how our lives are defined by habits, and I equated them to operating in our comfort zone. So right now, the CSRs, and again, if you call yourself an account manager, an account executive, a client representative, it doesn't matter. I'm talking to you folks who are in the daily service trenches, answering phones, walk-ins, and email calls about coverage. Obviously, you have a habit loop when it comes to bridging from, let me pull up this slide, bridging from the task to the ask. And here is the habit loop of one commercial line CSR and a large agency in eastern Massachusetts. I can tell you it's in the Boston metro area. Okay, this is her habit loop. And she would get a gold star for asking a lot. But to me, George, this is kind of like asking, do you want fries with that Coke? Do you want to supersize it for 50 cents more? It's a rote recitation of an ask that is going to go nowhere. It is not a deep inquiry about improving protection. And when you're connected to improving protection, it becomes much easier when you start with this. May I ask why? Because again, 70% of the time people are going to say, you tell me. You tell me. So I put this habit loop, and this is a graphic right out of the book, The Power of Habit, to illustrate what happens. You have a queue. The customer called you, and to do a vehicle change in our example. Routine. You go through whatever your operational workflow and technology routine is, and very often that call ends with, is there anything else I can help you with? And the customer says, no, that was great, thank you. And the reward is a quick, efficient handling of that call. You feel good, and you move on.
Right.
But what I'm talking about is breaking this loop and using every appropriate call, again, not 100% of the time, because if someone's yelling at you or rude or in crisis or in cancellation or claim, that's not the time to make an ask, right? We're clear on that.
Right.
But those times when the customer is just neutral and calling for a simple request, to break the old habit loop with a new routine. And this, 7 words, might be a useful way to do that. Useful way to do that. Okay? There we go. So as we wrap up the presentation today, which we're getting very close to doing, realize I've thrown a lot at you, right? I talk about lions and tigers and bears. Well, that was all just to help us recognize that yes, there is a lot to learn and know and do and study. And then I introduced these 4 elements of improving outcomes, right? Buy-in, focus, practice, measure.
Right.
And precisely because there's so much to learn and do, I said, let's just focus. And then I moved to what that focus would be, which is bridging from the task to the ask.
Good.
I'm summarizing here. And then when I presented my 7 words, which are, I noticed that, filled in with whatever it is you notice, may I ask why, to just embrace the idea that most customers aren't going to respond with an objection. When they do, that's a new level of focus and practice, handling those objections. I teach that too. It happens to be another 7 words that follow an empathic response. I think you should always reply with empathy when someone has an objection. But again, I don't want to get lost in that. And then I'm tying it all together by saying we have to, in this private journey to improve our outcomes, examine our habit loops. Examine our habit loops and change the routine. And this is a simple way to do it. 7 words. I've had many agents where they just put that on a sticky note. I've seen this in agencies where they're hanging it from the ceiling on a poster. Just some way to change the routine. And the reward might be not I was able to efficiently handle this, but I had a meaningful conversation that was concise and precise, and it resulted in a quote.
Beautiful. Love it.
Okay. Great. Now, here's what this may be a little bit too much because I've already talked about the sweet spots of growth and habit loops and measuring process, not outcome, and all that stuff. But I really want to emphasize the importance of small changes having the potential to deliver big impacts.
Good.
And there's a theory in finance called compound interest. Many people know about it, but it basically tells us that you continually save and reinvest as the interest grows on top of your principal over the long haul. There's a tremendously large compounding effect, and you end up with millions if you're saving the right amount of money.
Right.
But you're disciplined about it. And so too, George, with small changes in behavior. And again, there's lots of ways we could change how we handle objections, how we trial close, how we leave outbound messages, and what we say in our recordings. Lots of areas, but right now I'm just focused on the loop the loop that defines how you handle your daily service task. And if you begin to make a change on a daily basis, where you're starting conversations from the point of view of curiosity and interest in protection and educating your customer, as opposed to making a sale, then over time, there's a tremendous impact. And you can see, here it is, the aggregation of marginal gains. A little gain over time, you see the up arrow, the blue arrow.
Of course.
So that's an illustration that talks about how we should commit to this, and to move from the mathematical to the philosophical. I want to end with Aristotle's admonition. Yes, that's who that is, Aristotle. You know,
I remember him.
how many Yeah, you remember him. Are you that old, George? Come
I
on.
think so. No, I'm not. Well, go ahead.
Well, he reminds us that excellence is not an act, but a habit. He says, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit.
Mm-hmm.
And with that in mind, I want folks to know that my job as a coach is to help facilitate the gradual habit change, small changes in habit that over time can have a big impact. And I do that at the agencies at Kickoff Live, where I can bond with people and connect with people, and then I provide monthly reinforcement coaching via web video. It's similar to what I'm doing now, although you don't get to see me on camera. And for the on-site kickoff, for listeners of our Monday mornings, I'm willing to, for the rest of this year, this is fourth quarter 2016, provide a 50% discount on that kickoff event. If you want to learn more about it, my phone number and email is at the bottom of this page. And if you just want a freebie and never to hear from me again, that's fine too. There's a link at the top where I wrote a little CSR handbook of essential sales wisdom, I call it. It's a small pamphlet-sized book that I've gotten lots of positive feedback, and I invite anybody who wants it to download that for free.
That's terrific.
And with that, George, I just want to say muito obrigado.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you. I understand that. I believe I would certainly understand Danke, because old German background here, but that is a beautiful presentation. You know, then you're reminding me of a lot of things that I think we can do in the years to come, in the months to come here. We can, I mean, knowing you can go forward on any one of these things. So I want to thank you. I want to encourage people to go to that and get that. And particularly, I mean, even that freebie, that's a goodie. And give it all to your CSRs, your account managers, or whoever they may be. And let me thank you again for the great job you did, as usual. And let me tell the rest of you that we'll have more of this, because we found the guy, absolutely, and I'm appreciative of it. So thank you, sir. You're a good man.
Oh, you're very welcome, George. And I was honored to be a part of this. Thank you so much for the call. And I hope that this message resonates with even just a handful of your listeners. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
I will, and I'll see the rest of you next Monday morning.